when I give people advice on their careers or even, sort of how to position themselves for luck and opportunity, I always say, surround yourself with the highest integrity, highest intelligence people you can. I want to be the dumbest person in every room. That's my objective, right? Because then I know I'm in the rooms where the interesting things are happening, where growth is happening, where I'm going to get some opportunity that I've never even thought of before. And again, most people want the opposite. Most people, I want to be the smartest person in every room. I want to be in control. I want to be in command. I want to know what's going on. But if you just flip that and you say, well, what if you're the dumbest person in the room? And imagine how much opportunity and learning that affords you.
Welcome back to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. I'm your host, Michael Oved. Terrence Gable is our producer, and we've got a great episode for you today. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's guest. Sam Yagan is a serial entrepreneur who is the founder of Sparknotes, an online study guide service, and OkCupid, the internationally renowned dating site. He most recently served as CEO of ShopRunner, leading its $230 million 2020 sale to FedEx. Prior to ShopRunner, Sam served as CEO of Match Group, and now a $10 billion holding company that owns Tinder, Match.com, OkCupid, Hinge, Plenty of Fish, and OurTime. There, he led the company through Tinder's launch in 2012 and through Match Group's IPO in 2015. Now, Sam serves as co-founder and managing director of Corazon Capital. Outside of work, Sam devotes himself to mentoring technology entrepreneurs and civic leadership. Professional accolades include Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People, Fortune Magazine's 40 Under 40, and Crane Chicago's Tech 50. Sam has a BA with honors in applied math and economics from Harvard College and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Sam, thank you for joining us today.
Michael, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I guess we'll start off with a bit about your childhood. Can you tell us a bit about your upbringing and what about your childhood and young adult life drew you towards entrepreneurship?
Sure. I was born in a cornfield about an hour south of Chicago to immigrant parents from Syria. And when I think back to my childhood, it was, I think, a pretty normal, Midwestern Americana childhood in almost every way. With the exception that I was kind of, I think by growing up in an immigrant family, I was immersed in this trade that my parents had made, which is they left a perfectly comfortable upbringing and life in Syria for this very long-term, intangible, speculative bet that they had in their eye, that vision of something better that would be down the road for their offspring, for their family. And that they were willing to risk failure in pursuit of that. They were willing to work hard and risk failure and deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. And it's that sort of milieu that I grew up in that I think ultimately prepared me for entrepreneurship. It's not I didn't have a paper route to, something people had last century. I guess we don't do that anymore. I didn't have a lemonade stand. I didn't do the things that are sort of, often thought of as precursors to entrepreneurship. But when I really fundamentally think about people who take that jump and, when we talk about my decision to become an entrepreneur, in the 20 years later, that mentality of how to think about risk, how to think about trade-offs, how to think about the long term, made that decision very easy for me. And I think it all comes back to that scenario I grew up in, which is willing to take risk, willing to fail, as long as you have this pursuit of something very ambitious.
So if you're a parent and you're not an immigrant or you don't come from an immigrant background, how can you foster that type of environment in your household?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about the willingness to take risk. I think so many people are so risk averse. They don't want to, whether it's what classes you take, whether it's, whether you go out for the play or for the basketball team or just putting yourself out there. There are so many people who want to be in that comfort zone where they're taking the classes they know they're going to get A's in. They are doing the extracurricular activities that they know they're good at. And I think what's really important is to cultivate this willingness to fail, this curiosity, this idea that that you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be number one. The most important thing is that you're always learning, that you're always out there willing to take risks, willing to be opportunistic, even if it's not what the original plan was. Being willing to constantly not be so committed to the ideas you have in your head for what your life, how your life was going to go. And I talked about my parents being immigrants. The second most important moment in my upbringing that really drove entrepreneurship was I had the great opportunity to go to a high school called the Illinois Math and Science Academy in Aurora, which was in Aurora, Illinois, which is it was actually a state-funded school talented for students in math and science. And prior to going to that school, I was at my public school in the cornfields, and I was the smartest kid in my class. I won the spelling bee, I won the math contest, I won the geography, whatever academic contest there was, I won. And then I showed up at this Illinois Math and Science Academy on the very first day. I was 14 years old, sophomore year in high school. And I learned one of the most important lessons of my life that day, which is I am not the smartest kid in the class. I met my friends, who I'm still very good friends with, this guy, Nick. I met the first day of school, and I asked him, what do you do this summer? And I spent the summer playing basketball and watching wrestling and doing things that ninth graders do. And he was like, oh, I did the International Physics Olympiad. And I was like, oh, okay. I haven't taken physics. I haven't been international. I'm certainly not an Olympian, And but that was so critical that, okay, it was both scary and relieving at the same time, where my identity of being smartest kid in the class was shattered instantly. And I was like, who am I? What is my identity if it's not smartest kid in the class? But it allowed me the freedom in high school to explore. I went out for I'd never played basketball before. I went out for the basketball team as a sophomore. And that mentality, I think, came from what I was rooted in my immigrant family upbringing, that, okay, well, that wasn't your plan. You didn't go to IMSA to be on the basketball team, but let's go. You've got to just kind of roll with the punches. You've got to figure out the next thing to do, to take the chance. And ultimately, that's what led me on the path to go to Harvard.
And so really was about you surrounding yourself, whether or not by default or purpose or intentionally, you surrounding yourself with people who are driven, who are intelligent, who are smart. And at the end of the day, surrounding yourself with people like that drives you to take risks.
It not just drives you to take risks, but it drives you to constantly challenge yourself. I mean, one thing, when I give people advice on their careers, or even, sort of how to position themselves for luck and opportunity, I always say, surround yourself with the highest integrity, highest intelligence people you can. I want to be the dumbest person in every room. That's my objective, right? Because then I know I'm in the rooms where the interesting things are happening, where growth is happening, where I'm going to get some opportunity that I've never even thought of before. And again, most people want the opposite. I want to be the smartest person in every room. I want to be in control. I want to be in command. I want to know what's going on. But if you just flip that and you say, well, what if you're the dumbest person in the room? And imagine how much opportunity and learning that affords you.
And so I guess taking that and shifting that to Harvard, an alma mater which we share, what was the environment like at Harvard? Did you see an environment similar to what you had in high school at Harvard?
I remember showing up that first week, and you could tell the people who were having the same experience I had 3 years ago in high school, where they had been the smartest kid in the class, as most people who go to Harvard are, and showing up that first day being like, oh my goodness, I'm not the smartest kid in my room, let alone, in the class. And sure enough, that happened to me again, where, the two smartest people I've ever met in my life, Max and Chris, ended up being, Max was my roommate, Chris lived across the hall. And, but again, instead of being intimidated by that or scared of that, I ran to that. I was like, these are two amazing people, incredible integrity, incredible intelligence. They ended up being to this day, they're two of my best friends, and ended up being my co-founders. And so that was the biggest, that comfort, that willingness to be in a place where you're going to be challenged, and where your identity is going to be challenged, and where you're going to be lost sometimes. I think that was a huge part of what led to my success, both at Harvard and beyond.
And how much of that for example, at Harvard, you met your co-founders because they lived next to you. One was your roommate, one was across the street. How much of that is chance or luck, and how much of that is intentionality? where you actually want to surround yourself and you actively seek out people who are the brightest minds there?
Look, I think a lot of one way I've thought about my life is I try to position myself in the best possible ways to get lucky. You have to position yourself to get lucky. You have to get lucky, then you have to execute. And if you just sit in your basement all day, you're not going to you're unlikely to get lucky. Like luck is not going to come find you in your basement. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to take risks. You've got to meet people. And so I wouldn't say at all I went to Harvard looking to meet the smartest people, looking to look for co-founders. None of that was happening. But my general mentality was glom onto people who are amazing and build those relationships. And that's how opportunity will ultimately find you.
So once you found your co-founders, can you tell us the story of how you founded Sparknotes?
Yeah, and one of the common themes throughout my entrepreneurial career is I've never been the person with the brilliant idea. My strength has been being the complementary the person that can help the brilliant product visionary realize and manifest their vision. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't really appreciate, that in a founding team there are lots of different roles. Not everyone has to be a technology genius. Not everyone has to be a visionary. Someone's got to take out the garbage, and someone's got to do all of the work of building the business. And so, look, I'll tell you the story. But I think first it's important to position ourselves in the history of the internet. This is the fall of 1998. As a fun fact, my class at Harvard was the first class that was assigned an email address. Every class prior to mine, you had to go to the basement of the science center if you wanted to, get an @FAS email address. So we were actually assigned an email address, and I think that tells you, like, we were so early in the history of the internet. And my two friends were Chris and Max, who we started Sparknotes. And Chris is a tinkerer. He's a product visionary. He's a technology. He really thinks a lot about how technology is going to impact humans, how to build interactive experiences for that consumers are going to love. And he had been dabbling with building, web pages and, coding in HTML and whatnot. And he had started putting up what we would today call a blog, but at the time was more or less a personal web page. And he had put some personality quizzes on there. He'd put a purity test on there. He was, I don't know if people still read The Onion today, but sort of a humor. It was just a sophomoric, humorous college dude's website, like that, for lack of a better descriptor. And it started getting some popularity. And he's very thoughtful about how to build virality into content, how to get people to share with their friends. And he had gotten hundreds of thousands of people every month to come read his content, which at the time, today you'd think, oh, that's just a, B-rate influencer. But at the time that was unheard of. That was a very rare thing. And I remember he, around Thanksgiving or Christmas of senior year, he was like, hey, Sam, check out my site. It was called thespark.com. And I went to the site and I was like, cute. All right, funny, haha. And I kind of moved on with my life. I was going to be a consultant and whatever. And the calendar flips. We're into January, February, and one day, Chris says to me and Max, I think we should do this. And I literally was like, do what? Like, I didn't know if he was meant like go to dinner or like go get a beer or whatever. And he's like, we should do this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, we should start a company. And I remember having two opposite feelings. Like, that's crazy. And of course, like both thoughts went through my brain at the exact same time. And, I had gotten an offer to be, to make good money at a consulting firm and blah, blah, blah. But it was one of those things where, again, it never once occurred to me what happens if I fail. Like that calculus, again, this goes back to sort of both my home with my parents, but also at IMSA, my high school, where failure was just part of growth. And of course you're going to fail. And so I didn't worry about that. I never once made a list of pros and cons and what happens if I fail. I just said, let's do it. Let's do it. what's one of the unique stories about the founding of this company is we founded the company on the basis of the Spark. The Spark.com was this website. The company is called the Spark.com Inc. But before we even got our company incorporated, we realized we wanted to be in a different business. And we had, none of us were business geniuses, but we sort of realized that being in the humor business was tough. You kind of always had to come up with new content, and even the best, comedy franchises, whether it's Saturday Night Live or whatever, they have bad seasons, they have bad shows, and we knew we were going to be in this constant sort of race to continue to build content. And so we thought, what kind of content could we produce and offer to this same audience that would be timeless, which really leverages, the internet, which is, write once, publish, a million times at effectively zero marginal cost. And we were sitting in Chris's room, and he had had some Cliff Notes up on his shelf, and Max said, "Oh, we should put Cliff Notes online." And it was one of those, like, sort of apple from the tree moments or whatever you want, where, like, again, we didn't even do any market research. We were just like, oh, that's obvious. Cliff Notes should be free and online and available 24/7. Like, that's, a Cliff Notes that you have to buy in a book and read is like exactly the wrong way that any college student wants to, ingest a study guide. Like, you want online, searchable, 24/7 and free. And so we literally started hiring our friends. And I remember one of our friends had just written a Summa thesis on Moby Dick, and she's like one of the smartest people we know. And we went to her and we're like, "Hey, do you want to write a study guide on Moby Dick? And we'll give you $400. And she was like, "I just got done paying Harvard $40,000 a year to write papers on Moby Dick. You're going to pay me $400? This is amazing." And so we literally hired 10 of our friends. They spent spring break of their senior year, doing whatever people do on spring break, but, sort of on the side while they're on the train or on the plane or whatever, they're writing their study guides. And so we came back from spring break. We launched Sparknotes.com, first 10 study guides, and people loved it.
What was the first study guide that you had on there?
We had 10. One of them was Moby Dick. One of them was A Doll's House, and then we had some of the usuals, Shakespeare and whatnot.
So, for entrepreneurs who are kind of in the similar position that you were when you founded Spark.com, looking to pivot to Sparknotes, how can they know whether or not their business model warrants pivoting or shifting the business model, similar to what you did with Sparknotes?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, once you get, when you start a company, it's a little bit like starting to write an essay or something. Like, you have a direction, or maybe not write an essay. Maybe the better thing is it's a group that's going to go sort of, hiking in the woods. Okay. And what do you have? You have, like, the team of people that you are going out hiking with, and you have a direction you're generally setting off in. And that's it. And I think what founders need, what I see founders often doing, is they're so committed to the original idea that they had that they're not willing to take feedback from the market, feedback from customers, feedback from employees, feedback from investors. And I don't even want to use the word pivot. I just want to say evolve. Like, sometimes there are better ideas. Your idea should grow and get better. And as you become an expert in, you often start a company not being an expert in that field. You're like, oh, I want to start a company in study guides. We didn't know anything about study guides, right? We didn't know anything about humor. We didn't know anything about online dating when we started our online dating business. And so it only makes sense to me that you would you expect your idea to be refined and evolve over time. And so I think it's hard to put, like, hey, here's when you should or should not pivot or whatever. But I think you have to go in with a mindset of, I've got a great team and we're generally interested in this area. And we're very open to where the path takes us. And I think that's how you lead to the most likelihood of success.
That makes sense. Now, going back to something you said before about pushing off your offer from the consulting firm, and that's a pretty difficult thing to push off a salary that you know you're going to get for something that's by nature a tumultuous endeavor.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind there? And do you recommend other people do something similar to what you did and pursue tumultuousness, pursue risk instead of a steady income?
Well, I'll say a couple different things. First, I understand that not everyone has, the ability to forego, certain income. They have a family to take care of. They have, I graduated, my parents gave me a great upbringing, but we didn't have money to pay for college. I mean, I took out a loan for, the entirety of my tuition and related expenses. And so I had a lot of debt coming out of college. But here's what I would say. If your goal, again, it all depends. What are your career and economic goals? If your goal is, I want to have the highest likelihood of making X amount of dollars over my life. And you can look at, it's pretty easy to know what your income path is going to be at a consulting firm. You're going to make this for a while, then you're going to get promoted to that, and then you're going to make partner. And then you kind of know what that looks like. You know what a career in banking is going to look like. And it also depends, not just economically, but also as a career. How confident are you that you want to be a consultant or a banker or go into finance? And so I think there's no one answer to everyone. But I will say one thing about risk. In my experience, and with almost everyone I know, you get more risk averse throughout your life until you have so much money saved up that you can then again take risk. And what happens is two things happen simultaneously that have compounding effects. The first is you tend to take on more obligations over time. You may get married, you may have kids, your parents may get older, you have to take care of them. And so what starts out in general, you graduate from college, you got to take care of yourself. As long as you have enough money to pay rent and eat food, again, in general, for most people, that's all you need, right? And so, so in terms of risk tolerance, you have the fewest obligations in general coming out of college, and your opportunity cost is lowest. So sure, I could have made 60 grand or whatever, whatever my consulting offer was at the time. But guess what? After I graduated from business school, that consulting offer was 3 times that, right? And so the opportunity costs are going to get higher, bigger and bigger and bigger as you succeed in your career, and your obligations are going to increase more and more and more as your life grows. And so I think there's this false excuse or reasoning that people use, which is well, I'm going to be risk averse early in my career. I'm going to save up money and then I'm going to take risk later. And I really think that only works much later, in your 50s. Okay, totally. You've worked for 25 years. You've saved up enough money to retire. Your kids are maybe off in college even. And now you're okay, I've got it made. Now I can go take risks. And then there are reasons why you may not want to start a company, at that point in your life. So anyway, I think if you have a great team and an idea you're excited about, then I would say, if you can manage the financials and the risk, it's the time in your life where you're most likely to make that work.
Makes sense. And so you took that advice, you took the risk, you did it now, and then 7 months after being founded, Sparknotes was acquired for $30 million. What lessons did you learn from the sale? Did you make any mistakes?
I mean, we made a ton of mistakes. Look, the reality is that in any success story, and almost certainly in any entrepreneurial success story, there is a great combination of luck and skill. And the headline is we got lucky. It's just a fact. We got lucky on a bunch of levels. We got lucky in that we had built a product that hit the market at the right time, and Sparknotes became a sensation, a viral sensation, very early in its life. We were lucky that, as many people listening to the podcast will know, the stock market crashed in April of 2000. And so the fact that we sold the company, we got an offer in November of 99 and sold the company in March of 2000. 6 weeks before the market crashed. I mean, that's luck. It's not like we were sitting there in our office being like, oh gosh, the market's about to crash. Let's dump this thing. That's not at all what we were thinking. And so we got lucky that we built a product that was resident with the market, and that we were in an area of the market that was very interesting. People were very interested in community and content, and then we had buyers that wanted to buy it. And so, yeah, I mean, we of course we made a ton of mistakes. I mean, we made mistakes in how we financed the company. We made mistakes in how we negotiated the sale. But for a group of 22-year-olds, starting and selling a company within months of their college graduation, I think it's incredibly lucky, and it really set us down a path that transformed our lives.
So how did you found OkCupid? What's the story behind that?
Well, it was December of 2002, and Max and Chris and I and Christian all lived in New York, and it was a Friday night. And Chris called me. I got a call late in the evening, 11 o'clock, and Chris was at this bar called Sweet and Vicious, I think, on the Lower East Side, and he said, "Sam," and it was really loud, and he said, "Sam, we should start a dating company." I said, "Okay," and he said, it should just be this website with a blind date button, and you come to the website and you hit the button, and we set you up on a blind date, and it'll be awesome." And I was like, "Okay," and we hung up, and I had just shook my head. I was like, "That's crazy. That's not going to happen." And went to sleep, didn't think anything of it. And then Chris called me the next morning, and he's like, "So what do you think?" I was like, "Think about what?" And he's like, "My idea." And I'm like, "What idea?" He's like, "The BDB." And I'm like, "You're not serious, are you?" And he goes, "Of course, this can be great." And so the four of us started getting lunch at this pizza place once a week, every week. And we just started hashing through, okay, let's put the blind date button aside for a second. Let's think about online dating and what's going on in the online dating industry. Let's think a little bit about what kind of dating business we would want to start. And over the next handful of months, we really sort of coalesced around this idea of OkCupid. And the biggest thing that we wanted to do, and this is really, again, Chris's genius. The dating sites, and again, it's important, just like I did with Sparknotes, it's important to ground yourself in the history of the internet. So this is 2003, when really there's only eHarmony and Match. Those are the two big dating businesses. Yahoo had a dating business too, but eHarmony and Match. And they both operated under a similar premise, which is they were both sort of led by these psychologists, Dr. Neil Clark Warren and Dr. Phil McGraw. And the idea was, we are building this product because you don't know what you're looking for. We're a bunch of psychologists. We're going to build these psychological models. We're going to look into your soul, and we're going to find you a soulmate. And Chris had a very brilliant but simple observation. He's like, these guys are solving the wrong problem. And what he meant by that is, people know what they're looking for. Okay. And how do we know that? Well, people have been dating and procreating since the beginning of time, by definition, or we wouldn't be here. People aren't asking, should I marry this guy or that guy, or date this girl or that girl? What people are really, the problem people really have is, I'm not meeting enough possible candidates to evaluate. My top of funnel isn't there. And if you think about it, in an average week, and obviously not for students where you meet targets all the time, but for a professional or someone in the workforce, how many new people do you meet in a given week that are of the right age, gender, orientation, whatever? And so we started with totally different premise, which is, people know what they're looking for, and it's our job to create a massive liquidity pool, and then create a way for users to give us enough information about what they're looking for us to basically sort our user base the same way Google sorts the pages on the internet. And that fundamental difference in approach is what led us down a path of building OkCupid.
Yeah, I think beyond that, OkCupid was also known for its unique feature that is the blind date. Pretty much a revolutionary feature. So you said how you came up with the feature, but can you speak to the importance of when you're starting a company, doing something that's novel?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we did end up launching the blind date button several years later. It ended up being called Crazy Blind Date. Look, I think when you start a new company and you launch a new product, the odds are hugely stacked against you, right? There's almost always some incumbent product. In almost all cases, there's a way people are solving the problem today, right? So whether when you launch Uber, people are using taxis, right? Whether when you launch, Airbnb, people were using hotels. Like there's already some way in almost all of these cases, people are solving the problem. And so whether it's novel exactly or not, you really need to have some way of making that experience much more efficient, successful, cheaper, faster, more fun, whatever the case may be. And there is that novelty component of it, which is, imagine if you launched a new product that didn't have any novel components. It was just what everyone else was doing. Your odds of success are incredibly low there, unless you have some huge cost advantage or some huge marketing advantage that you can basically just, out execute. But in almost all cases, you need to have some novelty that is, but the problem is not novelty for novelty's sake. I think a lot of times, I always, when I see founders, when I meet with founders and they talk about their business, a lot of times they explain that they've got this new thing. And then I just ask, why does anybody want this? Like, imagine somebody made a, I don't know, a shoe, a sock with 6 toe holes. You're like, well, that's new. No one's ever done that before. But you're like, well, people don't have 6 toes. Like, why does anybody want that? And so I do think there's this, every once in a while, you see founders who are so distracted by their own novelty that they sort of miss the fact that they're solving a problem for a customer.
Makes sense. And so now as CEO and founder of Corazon Capital, is that the main thing that you look for when you're looking to invest in a company, whether or not they're actually addressing a problem that people have with a real novelty?
Yeah. So right now I'm an investor. I'm a very, very early stage investor, and different investors look for different things. And in particular, at different stages, you look for different things in a startup. For early stage companies, I look for 4 things. I first look for a big market. I think the biggest mistakes we made in Sparknotes and OkCupid were they were ultimately small markets at the time we went into them. Study guides are a small market, and online dating is now a big market. At the time, it was pretty small. And so that's the first thing I look for is big markets. Number 2 is I look for really painful problems. If you're, people use the vitamin versus morphine analogy, like you want a problem that is really painful because that is a problem where the solution will be more valuable. The third thing I look for is a solution that actually works. And this gets to that novelty point you were just raising. If it's just a novel solution, but it's ineffective, or if it's just a novel solution and it doesn't solve a big problem, then I'm not interested. I want a problem that really, really works in solving a really, really painful problem. And then the fourth thing I look for is team. Is this a team that can execute? And there's a lot of debate, in startup land about, how do you know whether a founding team is the right team? And there's this talk of, founder market fit. I happen to hate founder market fit as a concept. Otherwise, how would you explain 4 Harvard math majors starting a dating site? Like that, like we're like the anti poster child of none of us has ever gone on an online date, literally in our lives. And so those are the 4 things: big market, painful problem, effective solution, team that can do it.
And so based on all of your experiences, whether or not that's founding OkCupid, founding Sparknotes, leading Match Group, or serving as a director of Tinder, Grindr, advisor at Procter & Gamble, based on all your successes and all your failures. If you were speaking to somebody who's in high school or college right now, what would you tell them to best prepare them to be a successful entrepreneur?
I mean, I think the biggest thing you can do is, again, surround yourself with really high intelligence, high integrity people, because those are the people you're going to bring into the trenches with you. Number two is work in entrepreneurial environments. These things, they feel different. A startup feels different. The vibe is different. People work with each other differently. People work in different kinds of offices. They work different hours. They use different communication tools. Like, it's just different. And so don't do your summer internship at an investment bank or at a consulting firm. Don't just find an entrepreneur, find a founder, find a startup, and just go. Just spend time there. Help any way you can, because so much of this is osmosis. So much of this is just like feeling whether this is really something you want to do. And it's very hard to really internalize it without being in it. And it's really hard to have credibility to other founders and other potential co-founders if you haven't been in a startup. And so I really think, when I look at somebody who's been at Goldman Sachs and McKinsey, and then they're like, I want to come work for your startup. I'm like, really? Like, I mean, I get you're smart. You obviously got these jobs, but where did that come from? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is really be curious, and put yourself out there. Be willing to fail. Have experience failing. Have experience trying something. Even if it doesn't work, it's much more important that you try than that you succeed.
And so would you give the same advice to somebody who's now working a full-time job, but also wants to go into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit different. If you have a corporate job, and you want to get into entrepreneurship, what I would do is, if you have a little extra money, I would start angel investing, even if it's really small checks. I think it's just how you get in the game. Think of it as your education. It's like your own MBA. And then, see if you can help a founder, even if it's one night a week or on the weekend. You probably have something that founder, if you're a finance person, offer to be the bookkeeper, even if that's way below your pay grade. You're like, you want me to use QuickBooks? That's not, I'm a Goldman Sachs guy. Just help a founder and be their accountant.
How do you find that founder?
You just have to use your network. You have to you have to go to meetups. You have to put yourself out there. You have to, look on LinkedIn at your secondary connections and find, go to your alumni. Harvard has the iLab. There's all kinds of ways that if you want to, go, especially if you have any, intellectual or financial capital to offer, these people are looking. And so, if you say, hey, I want to be a mentor, or I want to be on a board, or I want to invest, or I want to help, people are going to find you. And even if you don't have capital, you probably have a friend that has capital. So say, hey, I'll introduce you, to some friends who can invest. So just, you're going to have to be resourceful in the same way that each founder has to be resourceful and figure things out. You, as us, want to be someone who wants to engage in that community. You have to have that same resourcefulness and say, okay, where do I go to start meeting these people and start getting involved?
So on to the rapid fire questions, the last part of the podcast. What book do you recommend?
I think if you're talking about a business book, I really like the book Who, WHO by Jeff Smart. It really made me rethink how I hire people. Another of my favorite books is called Influence by Cialdini, which really, I think, helps you think about how people make decisions. And then my favorite fiction book is The Count of Monte Cristo.
I like that one. And what is a quote that you live by?
The man in the arena is my favorite quote. I think it's up at least 3 or 4 different places in my house. And, it just really talks about, it's amazing how politicians used to give such different speeches back in the day. He just talks about the man that is marred with sweat and blood and fails and fails and fails And you can I read it at least once a week, and it sounds so unglamorous and so unglorious, and it makes you tired just reading the quote. But that is who he admires. Like, it's the man in the arena who fights the fight and gets back up every day and keeps going. And that is what is rewarded. And I just love that. And it keeps me going on days when I'm like, why did I do this? It's so hard. And it keeps me going.
And the last question is, and you might have answered this before, but what has been the key to your success?
I mean, I would say the willingness to fail, to take risks and fail, and then the pursuit of incredibly high integrity, high intelligence people, and just keeping those people, like that being the filter of people that you really try to invest in relationships and build relationships with.
That's wonderful. Thank you again, Sam, for joining us today. This has been a pleasure to interview, to speak with you, and to hear your story. So thank you for being here.
I enjoyed it. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you for listening to 30 Years in 30 Minutes. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments if there's anyone else you want to hear from.